light gate. We had some technical difficulties, but we've gotten through them. I want to say welcome to you all from the beautiful city of New Orleans at 107.7 FM and at the United Public Radio Network and the United UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. We're on Roku, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, Tumblr, a whole bunch of other different things. And we're just so glad you're here. And I want to say one thing. This is solemn to me. Happy Memorial Day to everyone. Thank everyone who in the past has given their lives to this country, who laid down theirs for the freedom that we all enjoy. Hooah. Okay, Preston. Hi, y'all.
Hi, all. Thanks for joining us on the Light Gate. I'm super excited. We got a great guest tonight. I'm Preston Dennett. My lovely co-host is Dolly Safran. And we're pretty excited. I wanted to say a quick hi to some of you all here. Joan, hello. Scuba Maru, Dawn, Lunar Dove. I can't spend too much time on this because it is delaying the show. But hi to Janice and Christopher Harmon and Dana Matthews, Susan. Hi, Sandra. Hello, Mary and Skyscanner and Raul Melendez and Louise, Ruth Kleiber. Got a nice crowd here today. UFO gods and extraterrestrials. And who else we have? Allison Carr, Real Badger, Victoria Olson, Neural Channels. Hey, Starletta. Thanks for joining us. So yeah, so glad you could all join us. And as you probably know, I'm now eligible for Super Chats. So for those of you who want to donate through Super Chats, that's always appreciated. And yeah, now 1 million views on my YouTube channel. So we're doing pretty good. And our guest tonight, let me pull up his bio because he is someone I've been following for a while. And when an opening came up, I knew he was the guy I wanted to call. And his name is Terence Tibando, or more popularly known as Terry. And he is a researcher, a presenter, an author, and experiencer. Terry's background and understanding of the UFO phenomenon expands, get this, over 70 years of personal UFO sightings and ET contact, which began when he was 5 years old. There's the pattern, Dolly. We see that a lot. Followed by a lifetime of many other worldly sightings and encounters. Thus began a journey into the mysterious universe of unidentified flying objects, extraterrestrial intelligence, and the paranormal, which, as you know, all goes hand in hand. So, Terry, as an experiencer, researcher, and investigator in ufology, is more than qualified to talk and write with considerable expertise on this topic. Like many contactees, he learned that other members of his family have had their own sightings. Another pattern we see a lot. Even his father, who served in the Royal Canadian Air Force as a nuclear civil defense instructor at the high security underground facility of the NORAD SAGE site in North Bay, Ontario, has had his own UFO sighting. In 1951, he saw a saucer-shaped craft emerge from an Air Force hangar in Moulton Air Force Base that flew into the air, hover briefly, and then descend back into the hangar. Ooh, we're going to have lots to talk about tonight. In the late 1960s, Terry began attending UFO lectures while in high school. Ooh, wow, early start. Meeting such people as Dr. Edward Edwards, a linguist from the University of Victoria, and Daniel Fry from New Mexico. Wow, Terry, I'm impressed. Daniel Fry, amazing. He's a well-known contactee and UFO author. Terry attended the University of Victoria, majoring in astronomy, physics, math, and other sciences. Yet everything he was studying was always leading him in his search for answers that would bring him closer to the understanding of nature and the reality of extraterrestrial life in the universe. I'm going to have to shorten this because I'm only halfway through. I will say that his investigative research, he was a member of APRO. Very cool. His investigative research culminated in 1996 when he met Dr. Stephen Greer during a 1-week Ambassadors to the Universe training seminar. And what else do we have here? He was a stand-in speaker for Dorothy Izzat. So if you don't know her, she's an amazing contactee. He was a panel speaker along with Peter Davenport from NUFORC and a lot more stuff. He was talked on the Grimerica Blog Talk Radio, has been interviewed on the Discovery Channel during their Alien Week. He's been interviewed on BC TV News and actually appeared briefly in Greer's documentary Sirius and was a financial contributor to Greer's documentary Unacknowledged, which was very well received. So he has been instrumental in coordinating, hosting, and emceeing the first Disclosure Project in Canada as part of Greer's Disclosure Witness Tour, which included Stephen Greer, Dr. Carol Rosin, and more. And for 30 years, this is interesting, Terry has led teams of people on field expeditions as the CSETI Vancouver Coordinator. Here's the last part I'd like to talk about. He is the author of the massive 6-volume books titled A Citizen's Disclosure on UFOs and ETI. 6 volumes, each covering different aspects of the UFO phenomena. He's appeared on most of the major UFO podcasts like Fade to Black with Jimmy Church, Everything Imaginable with the wonderful Gary Cacciello, the UNEX podcast with Margie Kay, UFO Paranormal with Jim Harold, and many others, including Tonight on the Lightgate. Oh, got through it. Wow, Terry, what an amazing resume you have.
Thank you very much, and thank you both, Molly and Preston, for having me. I've heard much about you, and it's a privilege to be on your program.
Hey, it's an honor. Yeah, really, really excited because there's not a lot of people who've been in the field as long as you have, who are still at it.
Yeah, I'm probably one of those unsung heroes in the sense of people in the UFO community, and I do consider myself somewhat of an expert, at least in Canada. I know there's a couple of other people, Chris Rotowski and Grant Cameron, who stand out as luminaries. And so I thought it's time that maybe people start to know who I am, and getting on podcasts like yours helps to promote not only my books, but myself, and hopefully to other future events.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. And how we usually like to start the show is digging into how a person got involved in this field in their very first experiences. And in your bio, you talk about having experiences all the way back at age 5, I think it was. So
correct.
That is fascinating to me. It starts so young. Dolly's experiences began at 10 months. 10 months. So yeah, Dolly's a full-on conscious experiencer. So I'm very interested to hear how it started for you. I mean, what was your first experience that you can?
Well, all of my experiences have been conscious. They're not based on any hypnotic regression. It's what I remember and what I recall. And the first experience occurred when I was 5 years old. This was in 1953. Wow. I suspect it was around November, and I don't remember the exact month or the day, but I knew that it was in November only because my mother indicated to me that in the process of trying to calm me down and make me aware of the fact that I may have been having a dream or a bad nightmare, and that I needed to dream about something positive, and the positive thing was Christmas, and Christmas was not too far away. So that was the sort of connection of the date timeline of when I started to connect the actual event. Now, I will say this, and my father was in the Royal Canadian Air Force, as you mentioned, and we were stationed, like many servicemen, whether in the U.S., Britain, Canada, or other countries, from one place to another across the country or into other countries. And we were stationed from Victoria, British Columbia to North Bay, Ontario. And from North Bay, Ontario, we moved to St. Jean's, Quebec, which was a small community and a small military base. Rather uniquely, though, this base had an aircraft, and it was an aircraft that was brought in from Germany. And my brother and I had the opportunity to explore this aircraft. Now, the events leading up to that was that my father had got us just moved into the military housing, and he said, I'm going down to be playing baseball with some of the servicemen. Would you boys, my brother being a twin, said, would you like to come and watch? And we said, sure. It was a Saturday. We had nothing else to do. We didn't know anybody. Mm-hmm. So we went down, and we saw the servicemen playing ball and catch and hitting it like a regular baseball game. And my brother and I got very bored very quickly because we were the only participants or audience watching this.
Oh, wow. So
we're looking around, and all of a sudden our eyes caught this aircraft, and we took off. My father never missed me, or my brother, and we went over to this tarmac, and here's this craft, this aircraft that had essentially one wing on it, a large tail, a nozzle on the back end, and a tiny propeller on the front end. And it had a German cross on the tail. And it was camouflage colors. And we ran our hands over it and played with the propeller, and we found that the canopy was open. So we climbed on board, taking turns to sit in the cockpit of this aircraft. This was a Messerschmitt 163E Comet rocket.
Yep.
They didn't have a lot of rocket aircraft at that time, and they did fly during the war, and they were somewhat effective, but they only usually had one or two opportunities to make a dive bombing attack on Allied aircraft. And so here's one of these aircraft completely intact sitting on a tarmac in Canada, in Quebec, no less. And I found out later that there's a river that runs by the Air Force Base, and I figured they must have put it on a boat and then got it off the boat and just wheeled it over towards the tarmac. So that was the first sort of exploration into the field of aerodynamics and planes, etc. And from that, I suspect that the ETs were in the area. I didn't know precisely. I wasn't even aware of the fact that ETs per se.
Right.
In November, probably a few days or so after that event, my mother and I went out for a morning walk along the base, pushing my younger brother for his in the baby carriage for the walk. And as we're passing some buildings, I looked up and I see a large triangle, salsa-shaped craft. Looked like to me, like a Mexican sombrero hat, dark underneath with a dome on the top. And the dome on the top was quite bright compared to the underneath. And this is daytime in the morning. And I said to my mother, "What's that?" And she looked at it, and she didn't really know what it was because there was some confusion in her mind. And she said, "I don't really know, but I think it's an aircraft." And then it took off.
So how low was it about?
Oh, easily within 500 feet, easily. Oh, it was right above a building. And, to this day, I'm surprised that it didn't bring other service people out to go and look at it, because I would have figured this would have been picked up on radar, because radar was definitely already out and available to most countries after the war.
Right.
Well, this is 1953. And as I say, within a few days of that sighting, I had ETs come into my bedroom. So they found me. I didn't find them.
Well, I was going to say, you know, when someone has a sighting that low, I mean, I'm sure you've probably figured this out. It's probably more than just, or can be a prelude to closer
Yeah,
contact.
It's the knock on your door.
yeah, it literally was. And I think that my brothers and I shared one bedroom, and then my parents had another bedroom beside ours. And this was a small house. It had a kitchen, a sort of a dining room and a living room, all sort of in one area. And interestingly, as I say, that event, as you mentioned, that when you have a sighting and it's somewhat close, there's sometimes a follow-up to it. And because my brother and I had been climbing all over this German aircraft, if they were in the area, they might have thought, here's some people, little people like themselves on this aircraft. Maybe we ought to find out why they were there doing what they were doing. And so they literally came through the wall, and to me, I thought they were ghosts, like Casper the Ghost.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I thought of them as little men, very bright, very luminous. Probably I was 5, so they're maybe a little bit taller than me. Had large eyes, but they weren't black. They were like a normal human eye, but large. They seemed to have a mouth, hands, fingers. I couldn't tell if they had ears or not, but I was freaked out because something strange coming into the bedroom that may be ghost-like. I just didn't understand it. So I was calling from my mother. She came in, tried to find out what was going on. I said, there's little men or little ghosts behind the door. Go over and take a look. Of course, she takes a look. There's nothing there. So she says, well, you're probably having a nightmare. So she settles me down and leaves and goes back to the room. As soon as she leaves, boom, they show up again. And like I figure there's about 3 of them. And, you get bits and pieces of them coming through the wall. So you get a head and torso and some arms. And just, it's very paranormal-like. And I had, I think, looked at comic books at that time, and Casper the Ghost was the only thing I could relate to.
All right.
So I'm hollering. She comes back in. She says, you've woken up the whole house. My brother's sleeping in a bed beside me. I don't know if he saw anything. My younger brother, who's about 1, sleeps in a crib. And I don't know if they saw anything. And so she comes in, she spends 10 minutes settling me back down, tells me Christmas is coming up, think about the presents you're going to get, etc., etc. And no more fussing or carrying on. So she leaves, and I'm sort of sucking up my breath and thinking, I'm dreaming, it's not real. And all of a sudden, third time. And this time they're walking around the bottom of the bed up towards me. And I pull the covers over my head. And as a 5-year-old, in that logic, I think, if I can't see them, they can't see me. They're not there. Now, something in the back of my mind said that the covers came off me, but I have no memory of that other than that impression. When I woke up the next morning, my brother was teasing me. He said, you're having a nightmare. So I suspected now he never saw anything that I saw. And my mother was sort of saying, you probably just had a bad dream. She never made the connection between what we saw and what was happening in the bedroom. And I didn't make that connection either until many years later when I thought back about the events. And I remember seeing a photograph or a drawing that Linda Moulton Howe had in one of her books, something about harvest or whatever.
Strange Harvest, yeah.
Strange Harvest, right. And then I started thinking about that. Now, the thing about this is that, quite often people say, well, maybe you were taken on board and abducted and all the rest of it. And I don't really like those terms, and I'll tell you why. If you're kidnapped, it's usually for some kind of a ransom or something that the kidnapper wants. When you're taken as an abduction, you don't come back.
That's right.
That's it. That's the distinction. Now, an abduction could turn out to be a kidnap event, in which case you might get returned to wherever you're coming from. But those kinds of things are usually thought of as in human terms, and those are the kinds of things that we do to each other. Not that all of us do it, but the humans do it to their humans. If ETs are doing it, do they really need to abduct us to find out who we are? I mean, the UFO literature says they've been around for hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps even at our early evolution. And I suspect that that is true. But the evidence for support of that is very difficult to prove. And I'm one of those people, I need the proof, I need the evidence, I need facts. And I will entertain all kinds of conjecture, wild theories, and all the rest of it. But that's all it is. When you start to provide the facts, the proof, then you're starting to get more people listening to what you're saying, because they can start to relate to it if they've had a similar experience. So one of the things I did in the morning was, and later in other days, I was drawing pictures of stars and planets and rockets, that sort of thing. So there was something there that my mind was trying to recall.
Right, you were.
So I suspect that set me off on the direction that I've always been pursuing, which was get a good education, try to find out what's going on with this phenomenon, talk to people, listen to people, read the books. And I don't know if you can see it, but over on my, let's see, right here,
I see it. Yeah.
is my book and all my UFO library. And so when I started to write my books, it was about it was 2009 I started to write my books. And when I wrote them,
before you get into that, can we back up for a second?
Sure. Yeah.
Regarding this childhood encounter. So in
Sure.
hindsight, would you call those grays, or what do you think?
That's what everybody asks me. And as I say, I'll tell you something. And you may have heard this from Dr. Greer at one time. I think you know Dr. Greer, do you not?
I do, yeah.
Yes, I think you've been out with him a few times or in the past.
Yeah, I think we may have been at one of the same retreats, actually, in Colorado.
Yeah, I went there in 1996.
I may have been there. Yeah, in Crestone?
Yeah. I'll have to look through my pictures. If I find it, I'll send it to you.
All right.
Okay, because I took a picture of everybody that was there. So the thing, like Dr. Greer was saying, and I accept this as well, because when we use labels to try and identify something, what we're doing is we're projecting our own human condition and experiences onto something unknown,
Exactly.
trying to make sense of it.
Right.
And when we use the term gray, reptilian, insectoid, etc., that to me is labeling, and it's racist, because it's like calling somebody from Asia a derogatory term, and I won't even say the derogatory term, or somebody who's from, say, Africa, and we use certain words, again, racist type of appellations that I just do not accept and will not go down that road. A lot of people say, well, okay, the grays are Zeta Reticuli beings. They're from Zeta.
Uh-huh.
No proof of that.
No.
And the reason why I say that is because in all the years of my contact, and I've had contact with ETs, and some have actually given me telepathic messages, and they're very simple telepathic messages, nothing elaborate, nothing with a formula, how they got here, who they are, etc., etc., etc. In terms of also having other people with me when those events occurred. And the problem I have is when somebody says, oh yeah, they came from that location, and it's based on Barney and Betty Hill's experience. My experience occurred 8 years before theirs did, if we use the same type of beings. And how they got that term is based on Marjorie Fisher's research of making a three-dimensional model of various stars based on size and illumination and that sort of thing, which is actually not a bad way of doing it, because I took astronomy in university, and luminosity was a way to determine the size of a star and its distance and all the rest of it. But the problem is, and this was also brought up by Stanton Freeman, and I've also met the gentleman, is that he said that you could take any star field pattern and move it around until you got a similar pattern based on the maps that Betty Hill had drawn.
Right.
Now, you have, and this is what I say to people in the UFO community, you better start asking the hard questions, the difficult questions. And that is, why would an ET race of beings need a star map?
They don't.
We don't use star maps when we send spacecraft off into our planets, and they're millions of light years or millions of miles away, and we put in a digital code and do corrective burns so that they go wherever, or use a slingshot effect where we get them to go around a planet so they head off in a different direction.
Yeah,
we don't use star maps.
Everything is perspective with traveling in the universe, and you don't navigate from their perspective. We navigate from ours, and they navigate from theirs, unless they're here, and then they use our coordinates to go back their way. And they don't use the same kind of coordinates, vectoring that we do. They use a whole different system for that. And I find it interesting that you're saying what you're saying. It's very dead on. And I have two questions for you. I want to backtrack for 1 second. You have a twin. Is it your identical or you?
Yeah, I was wondering about this too.
He's a fraternal twin. So you see in the movie. You see in the movie Twins.
Yes.
Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Okay, so you look really different.
He's Danny DeVito.
Okay.
All right.
Now, here's another question. What did he do in life? And I know what you did in life. What did he do in life?
Essentially, he went to university for about a year or so, and then he went off working. He worked in some government summertime type jobs, and then he moved into doing surveying, and that surveying would be like for highways or for other types of surveying.
Okay, now let me ask you another question. How psychic are you, and how much of that have you employed throughout your lifetime? How many instances do you have?
I have had a lot of experiences, and the thing is, I've had intuitive insight sometimes to what my brother may have gotten himself involved in, or a little accident or something, or I've actually one of my strongest psychic connections was telepathy with a friend of mine who's since passed away, and it was during a UFO sighting, and I wanted him to see it, but he was driving.
Oh, wow.
And what happened was there was two cars. I was in the lead car with him as the driver, and a lady behind in the rear seat, and then there was another vehicle with another 3 or 4 people. And the interesting thing is, we're going down the highway, and I look up and I see 2 round lights. And at first I thought it was an aircraft that is coming from the northeast headed towards the airport, which is a typical flight path for aircraft.
Right.
But what I noticed was these lights were like fluorescent lights. They weren't incandescent. and they weren't green and red. There were just two white lights, and it seemed to be pacing the car. And as it paced the car, it went over the highway, and I could look up, and I could see suddenly a red light underneath it, and then another third white light. So it was a triangular-shaped craft. But there seemed to be some understructure.
What year was
underneath.
that?
This was 1995.
Okay. How in
I think
Canada?
it was 95.
Yeah, in Canada, how much news do you get from the U.S. as far as technology goes and understanding what our government's militaries are doing? How much?
I have to root and dig around for it, and there are some people I think back east who get more information than I do. I listen to the news. I get some of the political stuff that happens with Trump and some of the other people.
It's
something may.
Okay.
Pardon me.
You have a very huge gap in understanding what goes on. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but the thing is, I tend to dig into things that are of interest to me, and if I don't get it off the news, I'm looking for it on the internet, or I'm listening to people like yourself, or I'm reading books or whatever. And what I found is that there's a lot of technological advancements that you people are probably not aware of.
Well,
I'm talking about not about spacecraft and reverse engineering. I'm talking about that your governments and those agencies that are covert have already started tinkering with interdimensionality, and it scares the bejesus out of me because I don't think they realize what they're doing.
Yeah, they're trying. Their physicists understand it now, but they don't know how to employ it yet. They can't do it.
They're working very, very closely towards it, and there's going to be, in my estimation, there's going to be a problem with them getting, say, a spacecraft to operate the same way as an ET spacecraft.
That's exactly correct.
You have to be evolved consciously, and they're not. We as a species are not yet evolved.
Correct.
And therefore, we cannot get that technology that is essentially sentient technology.
Thank you very much.
AI is not the answer. It's not sentient.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I love everything you're saying, and I just want to go back to what you said about labels and different species, because this is something Dolly has been underlining for a while, that ETs are people, that we all share the same heritage. This is a message a lot of contactees get. We love labels, and we think it helps us to understand things.
Sure.
But really, it can be misleading and divisive.
Yes, very much so. ETs, let me tell you something that you don't know, okay? If you have DNA and you're alive, you're a member of their family. All life in the universe, all of it, everywhere, there's a template to it, and we all have the same DNA. It rolls up differently. We look a little different, but we're all the same thing. Hands, feet, arms, eyes, heads, ears, mouths, nose. They eat, they sleep, they pee, they poo. They have children. We all have DNA, and so do they. We are related to them. They are our progenitors. We did not evolve on this planet, period. What's amazing to me is that whatever environment you're in, and we have examples of this here, we look different for a reason here because we come from different habitats. Some are very hot. We developed more melanin into our DNA. Your DNA is mutable. Whatever is bugging it the most, it corresponds to that and changes you physically to match what it has to survive in. And that's the same way throughout the universe. Some of us are darker, some of us are lighter, some of us have straight hair, some of us have kinky hair, some of us have very dark black eyes, some of us have very light, almost gray eyes. Same thing everywhere. We all have the same, in this dimension, in the third dimension, life. And it's hard because in this dimension, we're gravity heavy. All our molecules are very tight together. All the protons, everything is light. Most people don't get that here because we're so dense, they don't see it. But we're made of light. That's why some people can see auras, okay, and see things going on energetically around everything. It's because we can perceive it. We have the right equipment in our heads to perceive it. Outside this dimension, the first three are gravity, first, second, third, we're in it, okay? Going out of the fourth dimension, we start to lose our molecular cohesiveness, okay? And we start to lighten up, and you can start to see it more. And by the fifth dimension, you're fully non-corporeal in that dimension. You don't have bodies like you see here, okay? And you change. There are 12 dimensions. There are 2 below us and 9 above us, okay? That's the way it is, period, the end. And it is interesting to me that people here, and I'll tell you something. I don't know if you've seen this in Canada. I wish you would tell me yes. We've been told many things to become divisive for a long time throughout our history, most especially since the First and Second World Wars here. And, Germany was the turning tide on that. Hitler set the stage for no more diversity of people, and we're all one people. He set the stage to separate us all. And now we're living in a time where people hate each other just because of the way they look. That's wrong. We're human. We're Homo sapiens sapiens here, period. There's only one race, Homo sapiens sapien. You have ethnicities, nothing else, okay? ETs are the same way. That's my opinion, and it's real, and it's taught to me by ET, period. That's what I'm telling you.
I think we need to interview you.
He already did. He wrote a book about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very passionate on this subject.
Yes, I'm very passionate.
Yeah, I have a different perspective, and some of it agrees with you. I take, in fact, in all of my textbooks, when I wrote them, I wrote it actually as one massive book.
Okay.
And I realized that you can't possibly publish a book that's 3,600 pages and expect somebody to sit down and start flipping through the pages. Yeah. So I broke it up into 6 volumes. And honestly, it is very comprehensive. Mm-hmm. It is definitive in the information. I use the best available information. I had to correlate what I would call at least 3 or 4 good sources of information on one topic of discussion. And it is conclusive based on all the best available scientific information that I could gather at the time. Okay. Now, things always change.
Yes.
I look at the fact that there is life throughout the universe. There's those books. And you'll recognize by some of the ones beside it that these are the largest books on my bookshelf. The first volume on my left, as I look at the screen, which is probably on your right, is 842 pages, and that's 6.5 pounds of book. And then the third one is almost the same in terms of number of pages. They vary from 450 pages up to 840. So they're all different number of pages. But the thing that I have and that you brought up is the universal template or constant in the universe. I have to respectfully disagree with that. And the only reason why I do is because I've had not only encounters with different beings which appear to be humanoid, but there are beings in the universe that do not fit any known description of what we would consider to be a humanoid being. In other words, one of the I've had a download of ET beings, much like I don't know if you know the person Emily Kalika, who did I think the movie Sirius for Dr. Greer. Mm-hmm. He went out with Dr. Greer and he had a similar download of ETs.
Oh, wow.
Into him. And that was rather interesting because it was like a test. He said he thought he was being tested. In the same manner, I had that too. I saw a being that was essentially a giant eyeball on elephant feet. I saw what would be considered like an octopide or octopus type creature that had tentacles with very intense eyes. And in fact, in my remote view, I remember we were doing a stare off to see who would blink first. Mm-hmm. And I was determined I wasn't going to blink. And all of a sudden, I felt as if he smiled and said, "You passed the test." Now, that was a strange-looking creature that
Do you think he was
could have
third dimensional?
Pardon
Yeah,
me?
that was my
Do you
question.
think he was third dimensional?
Was that like a
Was he
physical
in-
creature or?
No, this was remote viewing.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean,
I
do you
had
think that creature lives in the third dimension? That's my
pardon
question.
me?
Do you think that creature, as you call it, lives in the third dimension?
Okay,
You can remote anything in the universe. Was it in the third dimension?
here's my understanding. You have to remember, I took astronomy, so I know what I'm talking about here. And
So did I.
the thing, okay, great. So the thing that I'm saying here is that there is a diversity of life throughout the universe. Some of it so beyond our comprehension, we would not even recognize it as being intelligent or even life as such. And so, because we're so conditioned with the three-dimensional perceptions, that we're balancing and correlating and experiencing all of that through those physicalities or senses that we have. However, are there beings that are perhaps considered interdimensional in nature and never physical? Yes. Is there beings that are considered celestial, astral, divine, beyond? Yes. Some people say when we transition from this mortal life into the afterlife, take on the condition of interdimensionality or spirituality, which is what the religions all say. And that has no physical form. There is no time, there is no space. In this physical condition, in this reality, we have measurements of time and space. But in reality, there is no such thing. Everything is energy. And I think you and I agree on that point. So it means that the energy that makes up me, you, and everybody else around us is the condition on which we are all living in. There are other beings in the universe who live in that same condition. Do they poop, pee, and all the rest of it have sex? I suspect they do, but it may not be in the manner that we would think.
All right. Well, let me ask you a question. Okay, I want you to tell me, how many ET contacts have you had physical in the physical here yourself?
None. And I'll preface this.
Okay.
And this may blow your mind, but when somebody says they had a physical contact, okay, we just came out of a global pandemic for about 3 years or 2 or 3 years. And everybody was wearing masks, gloves, and doing the distancing between each other. Or we didn't leave the house, or we only went out just to pick up the groceries and come back home. Now, imagine a physical contact with a species not of this planet. What are the chances of cross-transmission or contamination of various viruses from them to us or from us to them? That we would come down with something so globally pandemic that it would be killing people left, right, and center. So when somebody says they had a physical contact, I want to know how they were able to achieve that. A lot of people say, well, they took medical precautions. Where's your proof?
Well, let me ask you a question. Your first one where they
speculate.
wait a minute.
Don't,
the first one you had was not physical? Or are you telling me that wasn't physical?
No, when I had my first initial contact, it was as real as I'm looking at you.
Okay.
Okay. Now, what I'm saying to you is that because they came through the wall, they were employing interdimensionality. Interdimensionality is a science to them, where it is hooked into their consciousness, and their whole society or civilization is based on that. Their craft are interdimension. They're the spacesuits that have no buttons, zippers, velcros, or anything on it. And military people have asked, how did they put those things on? How do they take them off? They're formed onto the being. When they're formed onto the being, that means that all the nuances of circuitry, electronics, if that's what they're using, is incorporated into it. All the biometrics that they need to function as a being are incorporated into that spacesuit. When they fly the spacecraft, that spacecraft, in all likelihood, is built for that individual or for a group of individuals who can either touch the craft or use their consciousness in some way or form that interfaces instantaneously with what they want to do. So if they see a jet coming up at them at 600, 700, 800 or more miles per hour, they have to respond. As soon as they think it, boom, the craft moves and does whatever.
Okay. I people meet each other for a reason. Did you know that? That when you have
there's no such thing as synchronicity. It's all deliberate and it's up there. Yeah.
I'm here to tell you that it's a good thing that we met, because you and I are going to talk after this show, and I'm going to show you things and teach you things that you do not know.
Okay, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
I absolutely adore what you're saying. You're very smart and you've learned a lot, but you don't know the whole story yet. And I want to see how much I can show you. Real stuff, real science, real reality. That's right. I love this. I've been looking for people like you. I am one of the reasons that I love the Light Gate. It gives me an opportunity to meet as many people as I can, and to deliver information. And so something else.
I've had paranormal experiences that are different from the ET experiences, and I know that sometimes people will confuse the two because there are some similarities, but there is unique differences as well. And I remember Dr. Greer wrote a paper on it called the ET and the New Cosmology, and he was indicating these unique differences and similarities. So, there are those, they're not the same thing. Even a globe or orb that floats around could be not only a spacecraft, it could actually be an ET, or it could be a departed one, depending on what
can you remote view?
Yes, I do remote view. I've had remote view.
I want you to do an experiment. I want you to try this out, okay?
I don't do it instantly on command.
No, we're not asking you to do that.
No, I want you to get 3 of your friends who can remote view. Y'all get together. One of you be the viewer. That's going to be you. And you're not going to guess where this target is. They're going to give you a target at somebody's house, and they're going to be there with film equipment, okay? And you're going to say, all right, I'm going to view into you, and I'm going to walk around you and look at everything that's where you're at. It's called a live remote view. And I want them to be rolling camera, because what they're going to see on camera is a round orb, and your personality is, everybody's personality is different, and they run the gamut. They go from very light gray, white to blue. Okay. Some of them are even orange. I've seen orange people come remoting it as an orange orb. And you need to prove this to yourself, because your consciousness, as you remote view, leaves your mind. And even though you're still embedded in yourself, it's your consciousness that's leaving and going to the remote. And I have proof of this because I am a remote viewer. I can do it. It's one of my talents. And I've been caught on camera. I come in as a blue orb. Okay. I've been tested, the whole thing. Okay. You prove it to yourself. That's homework for you, I think, because this is an aspect of light technology. We're all, you have a pineal gland, right? Can you talk to me about that? I want to hear what you know.
Well, no.
Well, I'm not.
What I'd really like to dive into more is some of your UFO experiences. I'm really curious. What your father saw.
Dolly, that's a whole nother direction.
Okay.
And,
all right.
And I'm sure that what we want to do is to find out who I am as the experiencer and about the books and all the rest of it. And I think that's what our audience would probably appreciate.
Okay, well, this is what I want to zero on this. You've been out CE5, right?
Right.
Okay. How many times have you seen a craft?
I've seen a lot of craft throughout my lifetime, and I've seen craft during CE5 events. We've had them flash at us. They zigzag around in the sky. They will go back in a certain direction repeatedly. I've had a craft go over me and give me a telepathic piece of information, which was rather interesting because it didn't say a heck of a lot. And that was, keep up the good work. That was it. Nothing profound, nothing. I was hoping a tete-a-tete conversation. It never happened. But that's one thing I did have happen, and that's ET. That's a telepathy with an ET, and I've had one other one with a reptilian who looks like a gecko lizard, and he basically, I was asking for an extraterrestrial guide, like a spirit guide, right? And this was the being that showed up, and he told me his name, and after I introduced myself, and I said, "Do you have a name?" And he said HGN, and I thought, HGN, that's a very unusual name, and it made no sense to me. And I thought about it, and I drew a picture of what I saw, and I showed Dr. Greer at the time. This was down in Rio Rico in 2009 in October, and he said, "Yes, I've seen that particular ET." And so that was a confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind and making things up, that somebody else actually confirmed that. So I thought about this name, and then I realized, well, if he is reptilian and he probably has a language other than telepathy, that maybe I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly, but he gave it to me in a manner that I could at least understand and think about.
Right.
And when I realized afterwards that HGN was probably meant to be pronounced gutturally. No. Okay. In other words, something that we would perhaps think of if an ET who is a reptilian might be able to speak, that might be the grunts and growls or whatever. And so on the books, I drew the picture of the ET, Hugna, or HGN, as the being that I saw. Now, those are the only two extraterrestrial telepathy communications I've had. And then the other one was human. What I'm getting at here is I've remote viewed different things. I had a remote view while I was down learning to be the ambassador of Earth through Dr. Greer's ambassador training program. And there I had a remote view where I was on board a spacecraft, and it was descending, and it was descending on a desert-like area. And I couldn't quite understand exactly what this area was. And then I remembered, wait a minute, I've seen this desert before, but not from the sky or from space, but on the ground. And it was the National Sand Dunes in Crestone, in that area, up against Mont Blanc. And as this craft descended, my consciousness moved out of the craft, and I could see it was on an angle. And as I moved my consciousness further away, the craft got up and kind of came forward. Now, I went and explained this to the group of people that I was in, because at that time, Dr. Greer was asking if anybody had remote viewed and had any subjective acquired information. And I gave this, and a lady said I had exactly the same remote view. Same thing. So, two people. Same remote view. Now, we thought that evening we were going to experience that event. Turned out it's the following evening that event unfolded, where a craft came down on top of the sand dunes on an angle. We're watching through binoculars and whatever else people were looking at, and it actually got up and came somewhat closer to the group. And everybody got very excited. Now, at that point, I remote viewed, I bilocated, I saw into the future of a real event. 3 or 4 things happened at that particular time. And this got me thinking that we're looking at not just a CE5 event, but we're looking at another type of CE encounter. And that encounter in my book, I've labeled as a CE7. A CE6 is you have to be an astronaut or a cosmonaut. in order to experience that. And you have to be out in space, whether around the Earth or on the moon or some other planet. And that means you're going to encounter either a spacecraft or an ET being. Those things have already happened, and they're provable, and they're in the book. And as I said, not a lot of people will experience those things, but they can experience a CE7. And a CE7, in order for it to be legitimate, has to be experienced by more than one person, has to have the same information, and an actual event has to occur based on that event. That's the CE7. That's what I've written it down. I'm probably the only one who's come out with those two new terms for close encounters, and they're provable.
Okay.
So the point that I'm getting at here is that when you use remote viewing, and you're describing a thing where it's almost close to what they call a coordinate remote viewing, where you have a set of coordinates, or you're given a person who goes out with a picture or a place, and they do something or see something, and you have to remote view it. The type of remote view that I had, and again, this occurred back in '96 with Dr. Greer's group, is he said that there were ET bases on the Earth, on the Moon, on Mars, and some of the other planets. I remote viewed a moon, and this moon had a polygon type shape, geometric form. It was essentially circular, but it had more angles to it than it should have had. And it had a ridge running around the equator. And
yeah,
you may already know what this is. And as an astronomer, I should have known, or at least taken astronomy, I should have known what this was. And it was one of the moons of Saturn, Iapetus. Now, one of the things about this moon was that this ridge is equatorial. It's about 12 miles high and about 12 to 20 miles in width. But it also has a tower on the southern hemisphere. And I remote viewed that tower, and that tower has the ability to extend out or to retract. Like you would take a pirate's spyglass and extend it out to sea and then contract it.
Are you holding
your phone is, the sound is going out.
There you go. You're back.
Okay, so anyways, the long and the short of this is that was my remote view. 8 years later, the Cassini spacecraft goes by Iapetus. What does it find? A geometric type form to this planet. Half of it's light, half of it's dark, like the yin and the yang. It has an equatorial ridge, and it has that tower on it.
Yeah. Hit your volume button one time.
The sound's still.
Hit your volume button one time.
Yeah.
It's being covered up somehow. Your mic is covered up a little bit. Okay.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. You're back. You started to sound like you were talking on helium.
So anyways, that's a remote view of looking into the future 8 years ahead of time before the actual historical Cassini probe went by Iapetus. So the thing is, that to me was even more conclusive proof that a CE7 is legitimate. Because if that was not legitimate, it would not have found those things. But obviously, you have to understand that people say the Aborigines in Australia that have dream time, where they actually can dream about location.
Terry, your sound is still kind of off.
Your phone on top of your microphone.
Yeah, while you fill it with for a second, I'm just going to take a really short station identification. Don't go anywhere. But
okay,
that
sounds better. But let me just do our station identification, because this is the time we do it, and this will take just a second. I want to let you all know that you are watching The Light Gate. I'm your host, Preston Dennett. My co-host is Dolly Safran. She's right there. And our guest tonight is Terence Tibando. who is an author, an experiencer, and presenter. And you know what? I forgot to put up the little ticker tape, the banner. So I'll put that up right now. There we go.
Yes.
And we are streaming live on United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans in Louisiana, and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3. We are on YouTube, of course, Facebook, and Roku. So yeah, thank you all for joining us. Our guest is pretty interesting. I still have lots of questions, Terry. I want to hear about your family's encounters, your dad's sighting of a craft, and how you got involved with Stephen Greer and his CSETI stuff, because I had some sightings with Stephen Greer. I joined CSETI when he came to LA, and we had sightings the first night, the second night, the third night. Of course, he was gone by that time, and we had a little core group.
Yeah.
Out there. And I mean, that was a big year, 1990. Let me think for a second. 92.
So. 92. Okay. That's a little earlier than I was. I was aware of him in 92. And I actually started communicating with them at that point. My father, because he was in the military and we were living in Victoria, he had a chance to go back and visit his folks in Toronto, and the jump off point was Moulton Air Force Base, and then he would probably take a bus or something towards his parents' home in Toronto. Now, when I suspected that he landed probably in a DC-3, which is a propeller aircraft and used to transport military personnel and some cargo or whatever. And it landed, and as he was going down the stairs, he saw this hangar door open up. And he said he saw what looked like to him a flying saucer that came out partway and then shot up into the sky and then came back down and went back into the hangar. Now, I don't know what the time frame of that particular maneuver was, but it must have been long enough, and my father must have been intrigued enough by the sighting that he saw this and he said, yes, this flew. Now, he never talked much more about it, and I suspected that when his aircraft landed and the hangar doors came out and this thing came out and up and down and went back in, I don't think he was supposed to see that.
Right.
Wow.
It's like he caught something that probably wasn't meant to be seen by him. And he swore up and down up to his dying days that he saw that. 1951. So that was the only time that I know that he had that particular sighting. Now, Moulton Air Force Base, for those who are aficionados of various aircraft, was the base via which the Avro Aero was built. And this was, at that time, it was coming into development in the early 50s, and certainly by the mid-50s, they had put together several aircraft and test flown them. This aircraft was so far ahead of its time that they figured it was 2 or 3 generations ahead of its time, because it had automatic navigation, and if you didn't fly the aircraft, it would fly you. So you had to know where you were going. And it had, based on the claims, that it had a ceiling of over 40,000 feet, probably 60,000 feet, and it had the ability to go around Mach 2, not in a dive, but in a straight flight trajectory. And what was interesting about this aircraft is it had the Iroquois engine, and they strapped one of these onto, I think it was a B-27 or something, and it's a big bomber. And as soon as they turned on the electrical connection to this jet, all of a sudden the bomber lurched forward dramatically, speeding up, that they had to cut the power to this jet because one jet was enough to send this craft flying faster than it would normally fly. So that's the kind of technology that Canada was building at that time. And then the government in power was a conservative government under what was Diefenbaker, who was the prime minister, and he killed the program. And they got rid of all the models, all the blueprints. The parts were the aircraft that were there were cut up into pieces and essentially destroyed. But they always believed that one aircraft got away undestroyed. So that's part of the legend and the myth of Avro Aero and of Moulton Air Force Base.
Fascinating. Wow.
Yeah. Now, when we move forward in time, I had sightings in around my home. This is probably also traditional with a lot of UFO experiences, that ETs seem to know where you are, and they seem to show up wherever you move to. And so I had, when my father and family returned to Victoria, we had sightings, or at least I had sightings of craft in around the home or off in the distance, but obviously close enough that I could see that either with my own eyes or with a binoculars. So they seemed to be aware that I was tracking them. I actually built a simple version of a magnetometer using a magnet and a coat hanger and a bell or a buzzer. And basically, this suspended magnet would touch the side of a circle, which would then set the bell off and give me an indication that there was a UFO present. And it did work repeatedly.
Wow.
Yeah. So, that was an indication of my connection with the ETs or them with me. As I say, it wasn't so overt as more of it's there, but they're not sort of getting too personal at that point. Not as personal as I had experienced when I was 5 years old.
Amazing. So how did you get involved with APRO, the
Well,
Aerial
APRO,
Research Organization?
As I was going to high school, it was actually Dr. Edward Edwards, who was from the University of Victoria, was a professor, very knowledgeable in languages. He spoke, I think it was at least a half a dozen languages and could write 12 of them.
Oh, wow.
And he came during a lunchtime and gave a presentation about UFOs and APRO and this sort of thing. And he went out to investigate one of the sightings that occurred in Duncan, BC, which is just north of Victoria. And it's about a nurse who opened the curtains on a bedroom or ward and looked out and saw a saucer outside of the window. And she could see two beings in there moving levers and whatnot, and then the craft took off. He recorded that. That ended up in the APRO journal or magazine. It also ended up in a Canadian version called CAPRO, Canadian Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, which I also was a part of. And then what happened was APRO went defunct. It folded up, and a lot of the groups at that time were being infiltrated by the military and intelligences. And APRO was for what they would call the more the educated type of person, whereas NICAP, National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena, was usually brought out the military. And that's
interesting, isn't it? All these citizen UFO organizations get infiltrated.
And I can tell you that my own personal belief is I think MUFON was infiltrated, though I think they've done more to sort of protect themselves. I know that Dr. Greer's CSETI was infiltrated, or at least tried to be manipulated. And so there are people who came into the group and then left the group. And normally when you have infiltration into a public UFO group, they'll try and subvert one or two members, tell them that they're not should have been paid, or they're not getting a position, or the money's being spent somewhere else and not for the group, that this person is leaking information, or this person's qualifications, etc., are not up to par, and therefore you need to move, change your officers into with somebody else. These are the kind of tactics that are used, and some of them have been successful. And Greer found that out fairly quickly. He did lose certain individuals, whether it was due to that or whether it was due to other internal problems. I will say this, that knowing Dr. Greer, he's always been approachable as far as I'm being able to tell. Does he have an ego? Yeah, we all have egos. He's got one too. But there's a reason for that, because he's dealing with military, he's dealing with scientists, he's dealing with politicians. And if you talk to any of those people, they have pretty big egos. And so perhaps his ego was necessary in order to counterbalance what he was dealing with. I can't say for certain. That's just a projection of my understanding of him as a person. But I have found him to be open, hospitable, and willing to communicate with you.
Yeah, I mean, I've had long conversations with him. He's always been very nice to me. And I think when you're a high-profile character or, in the field, you certainly are going to have people coming at you from all sides.
Exactly.
I absolutely know he's a genuine contactee because I watched it happen.
Yeah, I have.
I mean, I watched it happen. I mean, people can say what they want.
He'll show up at an event and the ETs are there. When I went down to Rio Rico, I met up with him, and over 200 other people from around the planet met up with him. And it was, at that time, the largest CE5 grouping that he had ever had. And we had all kinds of sightings. But prior to him coming, we saw some what we thought were drones or helicopters. I suspect they were drones, and they were moving around in the sky. And not a heck of a lot was happening. Then Greer shows up, the ETs suddenly show up, and the drones started moving towards the ET craft. And as soon as that happened, the ET craft would move, and the drones would be chasing them around the sky. Yeah. And that's the kind of thing that we've seen. I've seen military jets chase craft that I was signaling with and getting a response. And all of a sudden, along comes a jet, and there were UFOs on the ground, brightly lit up, and I was using a high-powered beam to do photon talk. And what happened was, as this aircraft came, it shot something down amidst the UFOs on the ground. And I didn't know at that time whether that was a missile or what it was. I later found out it was a flare, which is what they usually did in Vietnam when they wanted to know where the enemy was. They shot a flare down to light up the field. And that's exactly what they did here. And in the moment that aircraft did that, all the lights on the ground went out instantly. And then out of the same direction that the aircraft came was a fast walker. And now, when I say fast walker, this thing cut across from the San Pedro Mountains towards the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, which is about 50, 60 miles apart, and flew right underneath the jet and over to the other mountain range in less than 2 seconds.
Yeah, people tried to EMP the craft. That's what they were doing. They were trying to hit it with a pulse to see if they could down it. And
well,
unfortunately for them,
these were already on the ground.
Yeah,
these were already on the ground. And what I was watching this through binoculars, and it looked like when the ET craft went underneath the jet, it looked like the jet froze in the sky.
Yeah,
that's how fast the craft was traveling. And when you do the math, it's like just under 100,000 miles per hour. And people say you can't see that. I said, yes, you can if you're far enough away to see it. And I was at least 15 miles away watching this. because I went and looked at the location of where these UFOs were, and I realized they were a lot further away than I realized. I thought they were only a couple of miles. Turned out they were at least 15 miles away, because we measured the distance by car.
Yeah.
And so we knew what the distances were to all of this event.
Yeah.
Well, I have more questions, but Dolly, do you have any questions before I jump in?
Sure. How are you still working with Greer? Are you still doing CE5s with Greer?
I don't do it personally with him. I find that a lot of his groups his outings are down in the States. I've only been to a couple of them down there. And yeah, they're a little bit on the pricey side, but I was fortunate enough that when I went out the first time, I was paying something like less than $500 to participate and spend a week there. And I paid for my room and board, of course. And so it wasn't a bad week spent. But I realized that over the years, his prices have gone up. You have to understand that he was a doctor making good money. And so he's had to try and get some of that income brought up to a more manageable level, because he has a family and home and all the rest of it.
He has 4 daughters. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, your own CE5s? Have you?
Yes. So I have the Vancouver CE5 Vancouver, and basically I've run it since 1993, which is 2 or 3 years after he first started his group. Mm-hmm. And I've had. It took us a couple of years before we started to see sightings of UFOs. Mm-hmm. By the way, I don't like the term UAP.
Thank you very much. That's a military term.
I don't even really like the term UFO.
Right.
What they really are is ETVs, extraterrestrial vehicles, or as the so-called military feel that there's a threat from Russia or China or wherever, then these are ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, of which America has a lot of them, as do their allies have a lot of them.
Yeah, they've had some crashes. That's correct.
Yeah, and they basically, the first group of people to have flying saucers were the Germans that flew during the Second World War. And they had the first CE5s occurring, but they weren't calling it CE5. They were calling it channeling. They were channeling the Andromedans, I believe. And Marisa Orrick was the lady that was receiving the information, and there was one or two others similar. And they essentially, there was a crash in the Bavarian Mountains back in 1936, and they went to the crash site and they collected the wreckage, and the beings were alive. And these beings helped, whether peacefully or whether under force, to help the Germans advance their weaponry. This is why Hitler was always bragging about, we have weapons that will end the war in a matter of weeks. And he did have those weapons, and they were brought back to the States through Operation Paperclip, along with the scientists.
Nowhere on this planet was technology good enough to back engineer, even with ET helping you, and ET would never have done
that. Well, they asked Herman Olbrich, and they asked Herman Olbrich this question: how did you guys advance so quickly? He said, we had help. And he said, help from who? He said, from them. Yeah. And, there were other scientists involved, and it even felt that Warner von Braun was involved in some of this as well. And this is the interesting thing, is that though he's considered the father of modern American rocketry in their program, he said to Carol Rosin that there is a big lie being perpetrated here. And he said that it's like played in a number of different layers or cards. And he said that the final trump card would be that a false alien invasion.
Yeah.
Which
So
is
Carol
rarely seen to be-
Rosett, for people who don't know who she is, she was his assistant,
Yeah.
right?
She was a protege who was a school teacher who worked with him, and he often said this to her, even up to the time of his final years before he came down with cancer that killed him.
Yeah, he
And-
talked about a false flag, a
Yeah.
false alien invasion, a false flag, and they're actually trying to perpetrate that right now.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. This is, and I'm glad we brought this up because it's this is what's going on off the west coast of California, and that is they seem to be buzzed by tic tacs, as they call them. And what the Navy people don't understand is it's their own covert technology.
Yeah.
And when when David Grush came out and told his revealing information to the congressional panel, a lot of people were very hopeful because they thought all kinds of interesting information, confirmation would be stated, which it was.
Oh, your sound's going out again.
Phone moved again. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Lift it up again. Free the mic. Oop. What do you do? Uh-oh.
Okay.
There you go.
All right, I'm gonna hold it. So, anyways, he comes up with this information. Everybody jumps on the bandwagon and says, "Wow, wonderful! We finally got official information." Unfortunately, if you're paying attention, you were getting limited information, and it was essentially controlled narrative.
Very much so. Yeah.
If people had spent the time prior or afterwards and listened to the disclosure, witness disclosure 2.0 event by Dr. Grant at the Washington Press Club on June the 12th, they would have saw 10 witnesses coming forward.
Yeah.
Military, industrial, scientists saying so much information that it was an eye-opener for those who probably didn't know much of anything. And David Grush didn't add a iota of information to what was going on. And Dr. Greer actually interviewed him at one point in 2022 and would have used him, but all of a sudden the news media got hold of him and he went on the news circuit with his information. So at that point it was like he was already doing something that Greer was going to be doing, but he was giving his own spin or a narrative of what was going on. Now, I wish people would do their research because this is the problem in our community, the UFO community. People will not do the research. If you say a piece of information and it sounds pretty incredible, but it's worth investigating, then
Your sound is still a little wonky, Terry. I'm sorry.
So you're holding it. Yeah.
the information should be researched by other investigators so that at least we can find out the same information, the same sources, etc., not just blindly accept something just because somebody says it, they sound official, and therefore, if they're official, we must believe them. Unfortunately, we're seeing the world go to hell in a handbasket. And it's like a lot of people used to look to America for the lead. And unfortunately, my perception is America has lost its soul. And its whole aim is on materialism. And those who support that are basically have their hands out wanting more money or whatever to support their own particular position. It's got nothing to do with you as the general public.
Do you ever wonder why a false flag? In other words, do you have any questions about why there is going to be a false flag? Do you have any idea why?
No, I don't have questions. I have answers.
Okay.
Because essentially it's what I call the wealthy corporate elite who even before the turn of the 1900s, were already establishing themselves. And by the time the turn of the century came around, where a lot of new inventions and hope for the future were being quashed by the wealthy, those magnets who supported who had the wealth. You take people like Tesla, who had all kinds of inventions and possibilities for a hopeful humanity. And J.P. Morgan said to him, well, if I can't put a meter on it, it's no use to me. He wanted to make money. And
Wow.
you have the electric.
Do you know what the Carrington event is?
Carrington? No.
You don't know what the Carrington event is?
No. I mean, you asked me the question before about what I knew about America, and I had to go root around and dig it out. It's like, now you're giving me another piece of information. I'm going to be rooting around looking for it.
I hope so. It happened I'll give you a clue. It's 1859, and it is an event that our sun sent out a coronal mass ejection that was so powerful. It's on the X class range, very high range, that it burned up every telegraph on the planet, including the telegraph offices. And that was in 1859, and it put a big heads up because the scientists that were alive at that time were starting to get the idea that something was going on, and they had enough geological proof that they were aware of to start trying to validate it one way or the other, and that's what they set about doing. And by the late 1930s, 1938 exactly, they understood what was happening to us in our solar system. I want you to look it up, okay? Definitely, because if you want to know why, there's going to be a huge false flag. It will show you why. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
right. We're still having some trouble with your sound, Terry. So I don't know if you can work with it a little bit, but it's sounding very tinny, very kind of echoey.
But the volume is up as high as it will go.
Yeah.
And,
I guess it just cuts in and out. It sounds well. We'll just deal with it as best as we can. But I would like to.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. The government doesn't like us right now, so.
You never know.
That's right.
We do have a few questions from chat, and we're getting towards the last quarter of our show. We've got about 20 or so minutes left, so I do want to make sure some of the people in chat do get to ask some questions. And here's one from Leo 62279 who asks Terry, what is the most mind-blowing sighting, remote viewing, etc. you have ever seen? Because I know when you're out there doing CSETI stuff, you have a lot of events, and remote viewing is a big part of it, consciousness. So yeah, I'm curious about this too.
Yeah, well, I think for me, prior to going and meeting up with the career, we had ETs. I was actually had a BC TV crew out with us, and we were going through the paces of what we would do in terms of setting up the group, doing the lights, meditating, etc. And they were documenting this and then interviewing us independently. And I've always suspected that ETs were going to do something major that would be undeniable. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that occurred was I had a set of strobe lights set up around a very large circle. There was 2 circles in this park that is used by remote control airplane modelers. And one of them, we called it, euphemistically, landing pad 1 and 2. And we had lights around one of the pads. And at the end of the interview, the TV interview, I went over to pick up the lights, and they were still blinking. And I noticed that one was missing, and I couldn't find it. I thought, well, maybe it got knocked over, and because it's halogen flashing lights, the halogen probably burnt out, and that was the end of it. But I couldn't find it, even with a search light that I was using. So I thought, well, I'm going to come back in the morning. I'll look for it. It will be visible, not a problem. As we're moving towards the cars off the field, one of the TV crew says, what's that light over in the distance here? And I turned, and there was a light coming from some shrubbery near a creek. And I went over there, and there's my light 200 feet away. Now, my first instinct was to be rational. How did it get there? Must have been an animal. Picked it up, ran off with it, thought it was some food. Realizing it wasn't, it dropped it. Now, I picked up the flashlight, and I was smelling it for any unusual animal smells. No smell. Was there any saliva or moisture on it? No saliva. Then I thought, well, it's 1 foot away from the creek of falling in and disappearing altogether. So it was right there on the very edge of the creek, still flashing. So this brought back to me the memory of having my computer being that the ETs put a cursor onto it in the shape of a black boomerang, and they moved it over a period of days across the screen. You remember the old Vista, Windows Vista, with the green, right? Well, this was off in the right-hand corner, and it slowly moved across. And as it moved across, it got a little larger. Now, I thought it was another cursor, and I tried to move it, and I couldn't move it. I thought, well, what's going on here? Is it burnt into the screen? Because I thought I had a problem with the screen. When it reached the middle of the screen, it disappeared. And that was over a period of about 3 or 4 days. So I knew at that point that if they can control electronics, they could also probably affect other things, including physical objects. And I've heard this story before from other people who've had things moved around on them. And this was something that was major. So that's what I'm concluding. Now, you also have to recognize, as I stated earlier, that ETs can control military aircraft and nuclear weapons sites. So controlling a computer or a light is a piece of pie to them.
Right. If it flew low over you guys without EMPing your electronics, the field around a craft is electromagnetic, and it can lift things up just by going by it. And it probably went over you all. You couldn't see it, and it picked that light up and went over with it when it shot back up. Could very well have done that, and because we weren't looking in that general direction, yes, they could have easily accomplished that. I mean, how they did it, I'm they
not.
Didn't do it. It's just a byproduct of their field, their energy field. Yeah, they're electromagnetic. They're anti-grav, and there's an anti-gravitational field around the craft. And if they fly low over you, whatever's on the ground can lift you up. People have said, God, I got dizzy. I felt like I was coming off the ground. Yeah, you probably were. So that light is very light, and it just probably just pulled it away with it as it moved by it.
There are cases where UFOs fly over a car and it will pull it right off the road, or one where it came over a horse and lifted it right up.
But we also have that technology as well. So this is the problem. It's like, how do you know what's a genuine ET craft or a man-made ARV? Right. Well, and the problem is, if it looks like nuts and bolts, it's man-made. Right. If it looks like a ball of plasma or fluorescent, it's probably ET.
Correct.
Right. Well, here's a question from Chris Teen, who's we mentioned false flag, and I think we kind of skimmed over it a little bit because a lot of people aren't aware of what false flag means. And Christine is asking, sorry, what's a false flag and who determines what's true and what's not? I don't know who to believe. So if we could...
Okay, I want to say this. Everybody's responsible for understanding what truth is. And the only way you're going to do that is for you to scientifically yourself research, know all that is knowable until you're convinced yourself. Nobody else is going to be able to tell you the truth. You have to find it for yourself, everybody.
Yeah, you have to experience this for yourself. And I fortunately have been able to do that. I mean, I've come from a father who's in the military background. We used to see jets and all kinds of things. I seen the SR-71 fly over Vancouver and seeing its afterburners as it takes off for the States. That's a pretty impressive sight. And the thing about it is that when you're out in the field, you can't just jump to conclusions. You really have to look at things. This is why, and I want to sort of give some promotion to the books that I've written, that when you get volume 1, volume 1 is basically a primer to all the other volumes. And if you bought any book from this 6-volume collection, volume 1 will tell you just about everything you need to know about UFOs and ET. If you go into the other books, I take you deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole to the point you're going to say, I didn't realize all of this was going on and that there's so much involvement and so much reverse engineering going on. This is the whole point behind what is man-made and what is ET. When the understanding and the breakthrough of electromagnetics and antigravitics was understood in the early to mid-50s, what happened was they understood the propulsion mechanism, that they incorporated it into almost every craft that they came up with. So if it was ball-shaped, disc-shaped, triangular shape, if it was square, if it was diamond, a boomerang, the same mechanism and propulsion is built into it. They're not all different. However, this is where the research is being carried on. What makes one craft different from another? Because they're not all with the same propulsion system.
You mean the back engineered ones?
The back engineered ones have essentially the same propulsion system from the early days. In fact, I have photographs that show one of the early attempts. And if you remember Mark McCandlish, who did the blueprint of a flux liner, you call it. And it's essentially, it shows the cutaway view of what was described to him, and he was an artist of military drawings and what have you. And I wrote to him, and he sent me a blueprint of this before he passed away. And the interesting thing about this is that the propulsion system is essentially what they call it, capacitor-type plates, where energy or electricity is fed into these plates that allow certain directions to take place, to occur. If you look at the outside of the dome, it uses conventional CDD or CCD cameras, which is how they're able to see where they're going. And if you look at, for instance, the Hanabu 2, which is a German craft, it was usually mounted with cannons around where the 3 pods were underneath the craft, and on the top they built another one of a larger caliper so they can shoot at various aircraft. Then you have George Adamski, who sees a Venusian craft. Guess what? Same Hanabu design without the guns in place. And he sees a blonde individual come off, and he says they communicate with one another. But he says it's interesting that the Venusian had a German accent.
Well, I just want to say something real quick, because there's still some talk about this in chat in terms of what exactly a false flag is.
Okay.
I think what we're talking about here is our governments masquerading as ETs, using reverse engineered craft and staging a fake ET invasion.
Right. This is stagecraft, and the stagecraft isn't just the ET craft, it's also the ETs themselves. These are programmable life forms, PLS, and they're essentially a cybernetic or robotic type creature. And there's been at least 2 incidents that I know where people have engaged with these creatures physically, and one was a lady who said she was constantly being abducted or having ETs in her bedroom. And one of the people at the time was Daryl Sims, who told her, fight back when they show up. So she fought back, and she scratched at the eye of this being and pulled off a lens, and behind where the lens was electronic circuitry.
Yeah, that's our stuff.
Yeah.
ET.
Yeah. And then the other one was an individual fought with one of these beings and kicked it in the side, and the being fell to the ground, and it opened up a gash on its side, revealing electronic circuitry. In other words, there are simulations of gray ETs out there, and there are other configurations of ETs as well. Some of them are reptilian. Some of them are actual people who have been genetically altered. this is the kind of programming that's going on that a lot of people are not aware. They think these are real ETs. No, they're not. Are there real ETs that look like that? Yes, there are. But do you know the difference? Most people don't. And that's the whole point. And so a false flag invasion is also known as a false indications and warning, which is a military term used to describe this event. And so they're not going to use false flag. They're going to use an FINW.
Yeah.
And that's the terminology.
Yeah, it's a national threat. Do you know about October? What's going to happen in October? They're going to have a day where everybody's going to be warned by phone, by TV, and by cell phone, like landlines, TV, everything, radios, every emergency system globally is going to go off and have tests. And people are starting to like wonder why. You know, they've never done a global one before, and it's coming in October. So they're preparing everybody for this.
They're trying to get people all excited and agitated. And personally, I don't buy into all of this fear mongering. And you know, the best way to avoid the fear is to educate yourself and be aware. Don't go down the path of fear, because that's just going to get you really emotional about something that perhaps if you understood it, you'd be less emotional. It's like people fear death. But death is something that occurs to everybody, and it's just a period of transition from one state to another state, because energy cannot be destroyed.
Correct.
We still have a few more questions in chat I'd love to get to, but I want to butt in and ask one of my own questions, which is in your bio, you having met Daniel Fry. And for those who don't know who Daniel Fry is, he's a contactee from the 1950s era who had very benevolent interactions with ETs, and I think his name was Alan, and it was a very interesting story. He was a rocket scientist. It divided the UFO field somewhat, but people like Timothy Good and a number of other researchers are taking a second look at his story and think it's legit. So I'm wondering, I think he's probably a legit contactee. I don't know. I didn't meet him. I'm curious what your impressions were.
Yeah. You remember there used to be I think it was a program called Petticoat Junction or something.
Yeah.
And the guy, the engineer, he reminded me of the engineer who drove the train. And he had this kind of look about him. And when you listen to the story, it sounded very natural. It didn't seem convoluted. He wasn't embellishing anything.
Oh, your sound is going out again.
Admittedly, how's the sound now?
Not good.
Okay.
I mean, we can hear you, but again, it sounds like you're on helium. I don't know what's going on. It just suddenly...
I'll try and get through this as best we can, and I apologize for the electronic problems we're having. Essentially, he explained that he had a ride from the southwest out towards New York and back, all within a half hour. And he said when he went on board the craft, there wasn't anybody on board, but he heard a voice asking him if he wanted a ride, and he took the ride. And I guess that's really where we're all sort of looking at some point down the road is, if an ET craft lands, will we want to get on board, or do we want to avoid it? And that's a personal decision that everyone's got to make if that ever does happen. I think that what he said was truthful and unembellished, so I accept what he said. However, there have been a lot of contactees who came out afterwards, or maybe even prior, who came out with a lot of stories saying that ETs were from Jupiter or Saturn or from Venus. And when you explore those planets, at least through NASA's eyes, they're inhospitable.
Right.
There's no way that life could kill them.
Right.
But the thing is, again, you have to sort of draw your own conclusions. I don't jump on the bandwagon just because somebody says I'm a contactee. I want to hear the story. I want to be convinced. I need to see the proof, the facts, etc., etc. I was even very wary about getting involved with Dr. Greer, because I thought if he's just another contact individual, I'm not interested. lately, and he mentioned things that only people who say belong to the Baha'i Faith, which I do, would have known. And I realized at that point, though he never stated it, he was a Baha'i, and he was. And so I was more convinced that what he was saying was probably true. And I went out and I met with him, and we saw the things that he claimed, that anybody can see. They take the time to learn the meditation and remote viewing, etc.
You understand that ET are psychic, right? Fully, 100%.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, the universal language is telepathy.
Correct.
It's not English. It's not Chinese. It's not some Venusian or just the Saturnian language. It's something to do with the mind connection.
Right.
All right. Well, we have like 10 minutes left in the show, so I want to get through a few more questions. And I want to thank everyone for holding on through our technical difficulties, because that last segment, you sounded a little bit like a robot, actually. It's funny because...
my secret's getting out.
Here, I just want to pop this up because Deanna says that robotic sound is something I've heard before when my phone calls are being recorded. And it's funny because, it does sound a little
I also want to tell you something. I'm kind of an IT person, okay? And if you have a cursor on your computer moving around, you're being mirrored, and there's somebody here watching you, and he's mirroring your computer. Yeah, it's called CIA, NSA, FBI. Whoever in Canada that does that,
And in
you write
Canada,
a lot of books, they're watching you. So
and in Canada, it's CSIS, and I actually believe I had CSIS in my home. When I had Dr. Greer come up back in September 9th, 2001, 2 days before 9/11, I had 3 gentlemen come to my home after a phone call and said that they would like to help with the taking tickets and
really?
whatever. You're right. What was interesting is there were 3 of them. They came to the door. One was an ex-mount. He was about 6'4". He could have bounced me off the ceiling without even trying. Another one, I remember him. He had glasses and I think thinning hair. And the third one was the one I cannot remember. I don't know why, but and anyways, they asked me a lot of questions about what I knew about UFOs, what did Dr. Greer know, which is really hard because I had to only sort of speculate based on my conversations and writings to him. And, they were pumping me with a lot of questions. So what I did is I decided to be a hospitable person and say, come, welcome, sit down. Would you like some coffee, tea, some goodies, etc.? And we sat and we talked. And by the time they left, they must have known that I knew who they were, even though they never said anything.
Yeah.
Then they showed up at the event, and they took tickets, and they came with green aprons on, which I didn't ask, but that's what they did. And I thought, okay, so they're going to take tickets, and if I was CIA or CSIS or anybody else, that's the location I'd take, because now I can photograph whoever comes through the door.
Yeah.
And I said to one of my partners, I said, what do you think of these 3 guys? He says, I don't know. They seem kind of odd. And he said, give me your impression. Like they're not honestly who they claim to be. And I said, well, like agents? And they said, yeah.
I used to live in Virginia. I lived right in the intersection between Lynchburg and Bedford, which is right where Greer was living near Monticello. Okay. And I avoided him like the plague. I knew who he was at the time, and I stayed away from him because I am a contactee. I had constant contact, and apparently so did he. And I would see stuff over his property area all the time. And I've run across him like in Walmart and stuff. I've seen his family from afar, okay, in the Walmart. And I just smile at him. He's a normal human being. He's a nice guy from what I could see, but he's watched. I'm watched too. And it just amazed me. I was like, well, there it is right there. They're following it. And it just, I don't know how he stands it because I can't stand it. And it's crazy.
Yeah. He's been offered $2 billion at one point, and when he refused, they went to his wife and said, well, we'd like to offer you $2 billion, and she turned them down as well. So the point here is that they weren't going to be bought off.
Right.
And as I say, I've had I think my phone tampered at times, and I don't seem to have any issues now. I think there's a sort of a state of mind that the public knows that this is real, and there isn't going to be much that they can say or do to convince them otherwise, other than a false flag invasion or a false indications and warning. So, you know, we, as you mentioned earlier, and I agree with this, we all have to do our research.
Yes.
Even what we've said tonight, I expect people to
Exactly.
go out and verify everything we
Don't
say.
believe a damn thing I say. Just look it up yourself.
Yeah, and that's what we're supposed to do on anything.
Right.
Absolutely anything. Before we come to a close, I want to promote the books, and that is you can get these books online from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Bookworld, Booktopia, Hudson Books in Canada, from Indigo or from Chapters, and almost any major bookstore would carry it, but you have to go online in order to order it. A lot of these books are massive. They're not cheap. They're like a university textbook. And
Do
I've
they
had
come paperback at all?
Pardon me?
Do they come? They're hard. Are those hardcover or paperback?
Hardcover.
Okay. Do they come in paperback?
The first one does, not the rest of them.
Okay.
What I found was that people were wanting to buy the hardcover over the softcover, which was unusual because I did offer a cheaper price on the softcover, but everybody wants the hardcover because I guess it's more durable. And I did approach the universities and asked the ones here like UBC, University of British Columbia, Simon Fraser, and I said, does anybody teach a course in unidentified flying objects and extraterrestrial life? And they said, well, they do teach about a few weeks of it in astronomy, but other than that, it only has a very small part. I said, they said, there's nobody here that can teach it. And I said, well, I could. So they weren't interested, unfortunately.
Yeah. There's a guy in California who is with SUFON, and he does teach a class at UCLA. Preston, is it that? I'm not sure. I remember what college was.
I'm not sure if it's at UCLA, but yeah, wasn't it Earl Grey? I think.
Yeah, Earl Grey. That's it. He teaches out there in the universities. Yeah, an actual class about ufology. So it's very cool stuff. Now, you're Preston. You have all his information in the notes, right?
I've got a couple of links.
Okay.
And I mean,
I did do this. I Googled you before a couple of days ago, and all your information comes up in Google. If you put your name in there and just put UFO, and boop, it all shows all of it. Your books, everything, all the.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So,
you know, it's gotten out there over the years, and at first it was like I wrote one or two things on the CSETI Facebook page, and I don't have a website, so I apologize to everybody who wants to know about that. But I have a cheap man's website, which is Facebook. It's under CSETI Vancouver, and I'll tell you something. There are posts there that you're not going to see anywhere else. For instance, I did some investigation on the anomalies on Mars, and contrary to what NASA has said, that Mars is a cold, dead, lifeless planet, it's not.
Thank you. That's my mantra. I've said that all along. It's a dead planet, dead core.
I found two life forms on there that are reminiscent of life forms on Earth, and I've named them, and I've given them the proper scientific terminology, and so one of them is a white marsupial mole, and the other one is a bilby. Now, both of those are found in northwestern Australia, which got me thinking: are we looking at Mars, or are we looking at somewhere on the Earth, and that the wool is being pulled over our eyes? Nevertheless, I named them, and at the end I labeled them Martian blah 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 Tibando, and I dated. So because nobody else up until that time has found these. Now they talked about the white Martian rabbit. No, that's the bilby.
That's the bilby.
Because I'd blown that picture up and I found a bilby and damn, it's the exact same animal. It's the same with the mole that's undulating and kicking up the dust. And there's a similar one on Google from northwestern Australia. Also, I found a large humanoid skeleton, partial skeleton. It's got a head, torso. Part of the rib cage is dissected and laying partway, a little ways from the body, and what looks like an arm. Now, when you take the rib cage that's laying off to one side and you cut and paste and put it onto the corpse, it fits. What are the chances, right? So then I went and dug out dead corpses of people. I got gruesome, and I found something very similar. You also have to understand that Joseph McGonigal, who's a remote viewer for Stargate, remote view told Martian aliens, this is the alien he was looking for. And to boot, another person found another skeleton of the same size and appearance as I found, confirming that there was and probably still is Martian life on there, and it's intelligent.
Well, we're going to have to end the show. I'm sorry, Terry. We're running out of time.
Yes, thank you for coming.
We got to do it again.
I'd love to do it again. If you would like, we'll book you again like in 3 months from now and do a catch up and explore way more. I want to tell everybody, thank you for coming to the Lightgate tonight. We appreciate it. We love you all. We love your.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Preston. I appreciate your time.
You're very welcome. We've been coming to you live from the beautiful city of New Orleans, Louisiana at 107.7 FM and at the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. Thank you so much, everybody. Night, night. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.